Okay, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. It is great to be back here with you, Ramy. I hope my co-host in crime here on the podcast, and we have a guest today. Our guest today is Mitch Stein of Chariot. I'm going to intro you, Mitch. Good to have you. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Where are you coming to us from?
I am in New York City. It is a gloomy, misty June day. It does not feel like summer yet.
Midtown, downtown, uptown? Where are you?
Our offices are in Midtown, so we're right here, basically in Hell's Kitchen. So anyone listening, if you're in town, give us a shout. We'd love to have you stop by.
Okay, awesome. I have not been in the city. I don't even know how long. It's been a long time since I've been in Manhattan. Maybe a year.
Check it out.
It's been once my parents moved out of New York to Florida, like the need to be in Manhattan ever dipped when I stopped directly fundraising from people. The meetings in Manhattan, which always took place in their offices, disappeared, and a lot of that went away. But I do miss it.
Well, we love it here. Our whole team's actually in person in our office. So I feel like we're one of the very few companies that, especially in New York, that doesn't have any hybrid or anything. So
that's wild. We'll have to.
But you're not a native New Yorker, right?
Someone told me or asked me if I was or thought I was a few weeks ago, and it was like the highest compliment I've ever received. But no, I've been here for a little over 12 years, but I grew up in Indiana.
Okay, so you and Ramy are more similar in that way than I. Ramy, tell him.
Are you from the Midwest?
Well, Pittsburgh. To the extent that Pittsburgh is part of the Midwest, we're sort of like our own little region over there.
We'll allow it.
But I also did my time in New York. I didn't get up to 12 years. I was there for about 6 years. And at that point, I was very fond of that place and very happy to move on to somewhere else. That was
I get it.
Okay, so I miss New York. The Brooklyn comes out when I talk to New Yorkers. It's not coming out just yet, but maybe we'll get there if you say something that forces me to have Brooklyn accent. Okay, here we go. Mitch Stein is the head of strategy at Chariot, a donor-advised fund payments company. He previously founded a nonprofit marketplace and community called Pond, which I want to talk about, after leaving his role as a VP on Goldman Sachs' technology investment banking team. We actually have a mutual friend at Goldman. That's what we talked about last time. He's an avid fundraiser, serving as a board member of the LGBT Center of New York City and a longtime participant of Cycle for the Cause, the Northeast AIDS Ride. He graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Awesome. Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And the main focus today really is going to be about donor advised funds and DAF and your work now at Chariot. But I do want to step back a little bit, get a little bit of that background, because you didn't start in the nonprofit world and then you jumped into the nonprofit world. So give Ramy and I a little bit of that background to start here.
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, I started my career at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, and I was there for almost 7 years, which is approximately a lifetime in investment banking years. But I was finding myself more and more engaged in more like community impact things. So I was, as you mentioned, doing this bike ride and fundraising and joined the board at the center. And I just found like that's where my energy was being drawn to and what I was a lot more passionate about. And so I decided to leave and pursue something in that industry. In hindsight, I knew like nothing about it. I just cared a lot and had a lot of passion and saw a lot of organizations struggling with outdated technology or trouble finding the right service providers or things they could afford or how they could fund all these different things they needed to run their business and operations. And so I had been working with a lot of marketplace businesses as an investment banker on the tech team. And I thought, oh, there's a clear opportunity here. Can we do a better job surfacing relevant providers and matching them to organizations? So I spent about 3 years on that company Pond and trying to create a platform to connect people on what makes sense, help them find funding, help defray the costs of these investments. A lot of exciting results, but like many startups, just never quite hit that breakout velocity and ultimately wound things down after 3 years. But in that process, I serendipitously met the Chariot founders and ended up being able to bring that kind of network and community and platform and infuse that into our work here at Chariot. So it has been an amazing fit over the last 2.5 years.
Awesome. How do you, is there like a through line from your work at Goldman to the philanthropy world, what you're seeing in terms of donor behavior, or does that translate, or was it like a total career transition for you?
I mean, it definitely has so many things about it were a big transition, mostly like cultural and just like the how of how you do your jobs. But so much of what I learned and did in that job, I mean, I was an investment banker, which most people, it's kind of a misnomer because most people assume that means like I was crunching the numbers to make investments. It's a much more of like a relationship and like client advisory role. Yes, you need to be doing analytics and financial models, but you're actually like helping to guide companies and how they make strategic decisions and make company-wide investments like acquisitions or going public or issuing debt. And so it was a much more like understanding the landscape and the ecosystem, making the right connections between people, building relationships. Like that's what I was learning from people I worked for 7 years. And I view like a one-to-one relationship with what I do as head of strategy for Chariot to understand the ecosystem, advise and work with clients on how they operate and think strategically and help make the right connections between players and folks in the industry. So I feel like it's actually extremely applicable, but more about the like attitude and mindset than like I'm not working in spreadsheets anymore. I'll say that.
It's super interesting. That does sound like there is a through line there between those different things, because it's not just like you're at a tech company, but there's a lot of what you're talking about is not about tech. And very much, and we'll get into it, I think, is the mindset and the folklore or negativity, let's say, or whatever you want to think about donor advised funds, and that behavior and how people think about it is something we want to get into a little bit. Can you start then on the Chariot side here and just explain two things? One, what a donor advised fund is. And then two, for a lot of people who are nonprofit people who somehow might not have heard of you guys just yet, what exactly the company does.
Yeah, of course. So DAFs as a funny word, I think all of us, if we could go back in time, would come up with something a little bit better branded as like a branding and marketing minded person. It's like, but you know what? It's what we got. And so we're going to make the most of it. It stands for Donor Advised Fund. It is a tax advantage account for charitable giving. I think the thing that makes it really click for people is like you've got a 401k for your retirement, you have an HSA for healthcare costs. You should have an equivalent type of vehicle for your giving. And that's what a DAF does. You can contribute into your donor advised fund account. Those contributions are tax deductible. They can be cash. They can also be securities or even like less liquid and more complex assets. People contribute real estate, art. I've heard of someone donating a cruise ship to their DAF account before. So it can really be a great vehicle to handle those complex contributions, maximize those tax benefits, and then you can invest the assets that are in the account, again, similar to a 401k or HSA, and you make grants out of it over time. But you can only use those funds to grant out to eligible organizations that can receive DAF grants, nonprofits. Generally, it's 501c3s. There's a few exceptions for religious organizations, et cetera. But in general, tax exempt eligible organizations in good standing with the IRS. Important thing is that there's no takesies backsies once you've funded a DAF account. So that's also a big difference from a 401k. It's not even at a penalty. Can you withdraw funds back? But that's where the power lies. It's not just about the taxes and like organizing your giving. It fundamentally changes your thinking once you've moved money into this irrevocable account for giving. Because now when you think about giving in your philanthropy, you're not deciding how much money do I want to part with every time you make a gift? Like, what do I want the hit to my credit card bill to be this month? You've already allocated it. So you're focusing entirely on the joy of giving and the opportunity to have an impact. And that is a fundamentally different psychological experience than giving with your credit card. And I just implore anyone listening to this to try it for yourself. Like DAFs have become super accessible. And if you're interested, especially if you work in fundraising, like you have to have your own DAF because it will help you explain it to other people. It'll help you relate to your donors that are using these tools. And frankly, it'll make you a better giver too. And so there's really no downside. There are so many options that are like zero minimums, low minimum grant sizes. Anyone can do this. And I encourage everybody to.
It's interesting because I remember a lifetime ago when I started at one of the first places I worked, one of the first nonprofits. They had a donor advised fund that people could contribute to, and there was a pretty high minimum for what you needed to open up a DAF at that point. I think it was might have been $10,000. Maybe it was a drop less. I don't remember. But for employees of the organization, they said, we'll waive it for you. You can open it up for $1. And I remember being like, I'm not going to do that. Like, that sounds really complicated and I don't really understand what it is. And then I like went on with my day. And now, however many years later, a lot of years later, DAFs are everywhere and they're super simple and they're super easy to use. And I don't really understand what happened between then and now, that other than things like Chariot coming onto the scene and making them more accessible, but like, how did they become so popular over the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I can't take all the credit as Chariot, but I do think you're valid, and there's something to it. I'll hit on that last because there's other like big industry dynamics. There in 2006, not to get like too ancient history on us, but there was new legislation passed that made it possible for community foundations to let individuals keep their financial advisor to manage their DAF account if they held it at the community foundation. So historically, it was like you set up your DAF at, I don't know, the Austin Community Foundation, the Cleveland Community. There's 750 of them. And then there's like 200 more that are Jewish specific in those communities too. And so it used to be that you just then, however they were managing the funds, you were just a part of that investment pool. The ability to maintain your own advisor and make your own investment elections was a huge game changer. And that permeated across the sector. And it took a few years for, I think, that to build up. But now that became something that those entities started investing in. More national DAF providers emerged. The financial institutions that had partner DAFs like Fidelity Charitable and Schwab Charitable, I think all benefited from that uplift. Then in 2017, we had the first Trump administration and their tax changes greatly increased the standard minimum deduction, which has benefits. It simplifies filings for a lot of people, but it really had a pretty negative impact on charitable giving because most people were no longer giving enough that they would itemize their donations. But there was a subset of the audience who was like, ooh, I don't donate $20,000 a year to itemize above the standard minimum, but I do donate like $5,000 a year. And my financial advisors told me that I can set up this DAF account and maybe there's a share of stock I sold this year or I sold a house and I can make a one-time like $50,000 contribution, get that big tax benefit right now and keep making my $5,000 a year in giving. That's called bunching. And we saw a huge uptick in that. And people moved towards DAFs as a way to still maintain tax advantages for their giving once their standard giving level was no longer benefiting them on their taxes. So that's kind of like a big one on the policy front. And then I think another one has just been the tech advances, aside from Chariot, but just with the actual DAF providers. Like 10 years ago, a lot of these providers where you had to call to initiate a grant request, like the minimums, like you said, were $100,000 to open an account or $50,000. And so it was just not approachable. And so the tech and then the actual like rules, minimums coming down, Schwab and Fidelity both reduced their minimum account size to $0 and their minimum gift size to $50. I want to say like 8 years ago. So that was this huge wave now, right? Of like two of the largest money managers making this accessible to anyone that has an account there. That's all brought this trend. It's not any one thing. It's like a lot of things providing some tailwinds. And then in the last 2 years, you now have a donor advised fund payment option. So back to talking about what Chariot does, we built a way for folks that use these advantaged accounts for giving to be able to donate with them just as easily as they could Apple Pay or Google Pay on a donation form. So right when you're inspired to give, you can use that account in 3 clicks and it takes about 15 seconds to donate. And beyond just increasing the amount of gifts that people with DAFs make because they can do it more easily in all these different places, it's increasing the awareness level of what is a DAF? Like, think about how many people that see donation forms and also who's the target audience for somebody to use a DAF? Someone that's already giving to charity. So it's like now on over 60,000 nonprofit donation forms. So we know that millions and millions of people are seeing the acronym DAF for the first time in the past 2 years. And we know that has to be contributing to.
Okay, Mitch, this is going to sound crazy, but we have to pause the recording right now because we're about to get a siren here, and we're going to pick a. I'll email you after, and we'll come back on and we'll restart from this point.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I'm going to stop it right now. Thanks.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Okay. Okay, we're back. This is take 2 or part 2 of that conversation. Just to give it a little bit of context, Mitch, Ramy and I do not live in the same exact area, but when, and this is going to sound bananas to a lot of people, when we get the early alert that there's a ballistic missile on the way, we do sort of have to stop doing everything and get to the safe room. Luckily for me, at least, my office is the safe room. So if you look behind me here, you'll see mattresses and stuff like set up because, every night for how many nights in a row have we ended up in here at some point. So it happens to be that this last one was a false alarm for us in our areas.
For us,
but not everywhere. So we appreciate that you're accommodating this craziness too.
Of course. Goes without saying, hopefully. I hope you guys are okay.
We're okay now. Yeah, thank you. That does and to give you a little bit more of the background, we both got the early alert knowing that the siren was coming. So we have like the double alert system basically. So as you were talking, we both got the early alert, which was like, deer in the headlights kind of a thing, but we didn't want to stop because who knows? So the last thing I remember you saying, you were talking about this sort of convergence of the timing, the tech, the big guys getting in on changing some of the rules, and that happening basically in the last 2 years, so that you find yourself in a position where now you have this DAF pay option, like you said, Google Pay, Apple Pay kind of a thing, and it's as easy as anything to use. And so that's where we were. And I remember my experience of it. I was advising someone I know was a very wealthy person who was looking to donate a lot of money. He was looking to figure out a way to set it up. And he tasked me with, go figure it out and let me know. And I said, okay, fine. So I went to some of the communal fund type of things to help him with a DAF setup. And when I told him the process, he's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. He said, every time I want to move money, I have to go call them in New York, and then they have to write a check, and then he is not worth it. He goes, I may as well just have me do it directly, and I'll write the checks myself and not have to deal with moving the money over. So I very much appreciate that sort of move on the tech side, and then at the same time, the community of DAF people realizing, oh, this is a great vehicle for a lot more people and that convergence happening now.
Yeah. And I think just the visibility of more and more people being familiar and aware of DAFs. Like there was a poll, there's not great polling on this, but there was one that was done in 2022, and only like 17% of adults in the US knew or were familiar with DAFs. So I just think, and you don't even need to do a poll to appreciate the opportunity. Like you just look at something like Fidelity Charitable. They disclose every year they've got 350,000 some odd users with using their DAF accounts. But guess how many customers Fidelity Investments has? Like 40 million or something. Like it's less than 1% of their overall customer base is using DAFs. And that's just one provider. There's literally 1,150 others. So it's clear to everyone that it's an awareness gap. And then it's a usability gap. And I think we can help on both. Like I view that as personally, my job is both. How can we make this a tool that's easier to use anywhere and everywhere that you want to give? And how can we make sure that everybody knows about this as a giving option?
The thing that I'm also trying to wrap my head around when it comes to DAFs is it a tool only for the wealthy? Or does it make sense when you don't have that 20,000 to contribute or whatever that threshold is to still donate, to still use DAFs to donate?
Yeah, I think yes is the answer. The short answer is just yes. But I feel extremely strongly about this because especially for younger people, I just think that we don't have enough of a culture of philanthropy, at least in the US. And I think, you see this at all the nonprofits that behind the scenes, or you get into a conversation with someone that works in fundraising, and one of their top concerns would be the fact that their donors are getting really old and that they are reliant upon a much older generation of folks that are giving and feeling this gap. And it's strange because young people love engaging with causes and love being active and advocates, and they talk about these things on social media all the time, but there is not a connection to giving. I th- I think the way to solve that is for giving to be a financial planning decision that we need to make fun and exciting and accessible and habitual and like a part of your finances. And the best way to do that is to have a dedicated account where you manage giving. Even if you're not like me, I do not get any tax benefits for my donations. I'm donating like a few $1,000s a year, but I've started doing it entirely through my DAF. And so now, whenever someone asks me to donate to their bike ride, I'm a sucker for those since I always ask everybody to donate to my bike ride. But now I'm like, if I was going to give $20, I'll give 50. Or if I was going to give 50, I'll probably give 100 because I have this dedicated money set aside that's not impacting my budget. I see that change on a weekly basis when I do my giving, just from having a DAF. The other benefit is that I have a DAF through my employer who offers it like a 401k. And they actually do a match for my contributions into my DAF account. So I have a recurring contribution from my bank account to my DAF for $200 every month that is automatically matched by my employer and then automatically invested in the market. So the next time I open my DAF, I'm like, whoa, I got an extra $500 in there. Like, it's amazing how that being just on, automated in the background, I don't have to think about it. And then when I'm in that moment to give, it's reflexive, it is easy, it is something that's exciting. And that is a fundamental change to my mindset and psychology that I think every single person, if you donate or want to donate to at least one organization a year, which I think is the vast majority of people would say they want to do that, would benefit from using a tool to help ingrain that in their life.
Is that pre-tax also?
No.
Oh, okay. That would have made it even better. Okay. I'm just thinking about all the checks in the boxes that you just pulled off there, and then that it's automated really probably just makes it the easiest part. Is you never think about it; it just happens and it's there. And then there's the 200, and then it goes into the DAF. I didn't even have to do anything, and there's the money. And so you've habituated something you don't actually have to do anything about until the organization reaches out and says, "Hey, make a donation," and then you just click the button on the other end. The one thing I think that's important that you maybe didn't mention is starting it early. Like you talked about young people not getting into that culture of philanthropy. You could probably set up a system where a DAF starts as early as the person can have a bank account. They could have a DAF account, and then you're starting the educational process towards philanthropy and giving and support and all that other stuff much, much earlier so that you eliminate some of that concern in the gap where people aren't getting into giving and donating at an earlier age.
To any parents listening to this conversation, that is like one of the top benefits of a DAF that I hear all the time, is that you use it as like a family account for giving and engaging your kids in. And I know people that do it on a monthly or quarterly basis where they literally get around the dinner table and they're like, we've got X, we've got $100, $500, $10,000. Like, the beauty of this is it doesn't matter what the amount is. It scales to whatever your capacity is as a person, but it is about exploring where you can have an impact, what you care about. Like, encourage your kids to research. What are they passionate about? And I've heard these just like amazing stories about folks' kids who are finding organizations they love, then they're sending them a special note when they make that gift. And it's just more evidence of how it's not just about saving money or saving time, but it really enriches your experience with giving to have that level of engagement and involvement.
Is the employer matching program, is that something that is becoming common? I haven't heard that before. Obviously Chariot is in the know on this, but like, is that something that's happening?
Yeah, there's a few providers. I really hope this becomes the norm for reasons I'll get into. But yes, so Daffy offers this to a number of companies now. Groundswell is another one. I saw they just onboarded BNY Mellon as their largest client to date. And it's ironic because BNY Mellon has a DAF, and yet they're using this external DAF provider to provide DAFs as a benefit to their employees. Morgan Stanley at work now offers DAFs as like a part of the package alongside 401ks. A lot of, especially financial companies and law firms, have done this for a while for senior people. But now we have the technology to be able to offer this at more scale to broader employees, which is really powerful. Now, the reason that this is so powerful, and I'll also explain why it hasn't been adopted as quickly as it should. It is a no-brainer for anyone who has ever been involved with employee matching at any level, the employer, the employee, or the nonprofit. It's a nightmare. I won't curse on this podcast. I don't know what the policy is.
We actually don't have a policy on that because it never came up until now, but test us, see what happens.
It's a freaking nightmare because so you as the employee, you that you can get things matched. Maybe a lot of people don't even know, and they make a donation, and then they go log into the system that looks like it was built on Fortran in the 80s to submit this donation request. They try to look up the organization, all the data is outdated, everything's slow. Then the company needs to vet and verify that they want to send an additional gift to that organization. Then they're going to like cut a check and actually send it to that individual nonprofit. That individual nonprofit now receives this gift weeks or months after the original donation, and they're trying to match it back to that original donor in their database. And oftentimes they get those like at the end of the month with thousands of line items in it, and someone is manually going through and like matching it to their donor records. Bananas. Think about the comparison to someone offering DAF matching to their employees. I set up an auto contribution. They set up an auto match. I make my donations. Period. The end. Like the difference in experience is just unbelievable. The reason that people don't adopt this is because companies like being able to have a headline number, will match up to $20,000 per employee, and then be able to say, we offer 20,000 times 100,000 employees, like billions of dollars a year in this benefit, and not have people use it. So if they made it super easy and utilization went way up, they would need to lower their commitment, which is fine. And it nets out to be the same amount that they're donating, but they don't get the marketable amount. And so it's just, they're willing to hold on to these archaic systems for that.
But then they're missing out on the other side of that story also, which is how much charitable giving they have actually created and the culture that they have as a company and all the good vibes that they get as an organization from having all that actually happen. It's almost like good marketing investment to actually do it rather than to try to keep it, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I explained is very short-sighted. What you're explaining is like thoughtful and strategic. Because yeah, obviously your employees utilizing your benefits is a core signifier of like good company culture and like happy employees. So imagine how great to be able to say, we offer up to $5,000 a year in match into DAFs, and we have 95% of our employees utilize that, or over 50% max that out. Like that'd be amazing. And by the way, the other benefit I didn't mention, now the employer is no longer, they have zero attachment to where those gifts are made. So in a world of increasing scrutiny on like what you do or don't support, and all of a sudden like nonprofits are politicized that historically were not at all, and you're making judgment calls like, do we want to support Planned Parenthood or not? Or like, do we want to like whatever? Then you are now washing your hands clean of that. Because otherwise, if you're making each individual match, you're making a conscious decision to have a donation go from company name to that nonprofit versus this is a benefit, just like salary, to this individual to go give as they please, and we're no longer connected to it.
So do you have any inside information as to how places like BNY Mellon got it through?
I don't. I'm speaking with the Groundswell folks this week though, and I will definitely ask. I'm curious how they're like changing
that's
mindsets here.
Fascinating.
One of the things I'm curious at, and Ramy and I, both of us, when I was back at the company at Cosmatch, one of the things we researched one year towards our annual planning strategy was towards a donor advised fund kind of piece in the crowdfunding space. And one of the things that jumped out was that most of the money that's donated to DAFs stay with the DAFs. This idea, I think the term, I don't know, Ramy, you used it or someone used it, like almost like warehousing the money, but the money from themselves, it's in the DAF and it just sits there. And the companies are just sitting on that money and not encouraging or not doing anything to move any of that money out. So speak about that other side of it, which is I get where the benefit is to the donor potentially, but is more money ultimately moving actually to the nonprofits?
Yes. So this is, apart from people not knowing what a DAF is, this is like the second biggest issue I come across in the nonprofit space, where there's really big numbers involved in a DAF and it's growing really fast. So that always draws a lot of attention. So there's over $250 billion in DAFs that we know of as of the end of 2023. My guess is that's actually significantly higher at this point, given the market growth we've seen since then in the past year and a half. And so the annual payout rate recorded by DAFs averages over 20%, has every year since they started tracking this in like 2007. The mandatory payout rate for private foundations is 5%. So we're talking about something that's like multiples above where you have a mandatory. But people get uncomfortable with the fact that there isn't a federally mandated payout rate, even if in practice they are utilized at much higher rates. And so I think the data points are helpful to share with people, like the fact that the grant making out of DAFs is growing considerably faster than the asset growth is really important. So we're at around $55 billion granted out in 2023. That's 6x what the grant volume was 10 years earlier. The asset volume is 5x what it was 10 years earlier. So both growing really fast, but granting's growing faster, which I think is what's important. So that's like the stats. Also just like what's incorrect when people saying like, this can just sit here forever, or they're not forced to give. This market is dominated by a few players. So the overall like asset value is absolutely dominated by Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard, NPT, like a few others. But it's like, you're talking like 80% of the market sits with like fewer than 10 DAF providers. I'm fairly positive every one of them has an inactive account policy where they mandate giving or reclaim accounts after a certain period of time of inactivity. So like, no, you cannot just sit on these assets forever. Almost every single DAF, I think it's like 97, 98% of them have a policy, an enforcement policy around inactive accounts. For Fidelity, far and away the largest provider, they're twice as large as the next largest, which is Schwab, now known as DAF Giving 360. If you go 1 year without making a grant, they have like an outreach and engagement policy. If you go a whole second year without making a grant, they start forcing 5% of your account out in grants. So it's just like, that's just like the stats and the data and the reality around what's happening that I think goes against that narrative. But then there's an even bigger piece, which is the actual data from nonprofits about what happens when a donor starts using a DAF. And that's the research that we've led through the DAF fundraising report, which we published the first edition of last year. The next edition, probably by the time this airs, will also be live. So we can link to that as we're publishing it next week. But one of the key things that we looked at here is the first time anyone has analyzed nonprofits' own data with regard to DAF giving. So we looked at historical donation data. Last year was 20 organizations. This year's 30. It's like over $10 billion in revenue that we were analyzing and comparing DAF and non-DAF giving from the nonprofit perspective. And the most powerful thing we could see is when an individual donor gives to an organization for the first time using their DAF. So I donated to American Cancer Society in 2021, and in 2022, I used a DAF for the first time. Previously, I gave the credit card. What happens? So we have tens of thousands of examples of these donor conversions, people switching how they give. And the average increase is 100% change in their giving, meaning I doubled my donation once I used my DAF instead of a credit card. Same person, same organization. The change was how they gave. There's a lot of things that could affect that. I'm not saying it's like definitively a 100% related to the DAF, but across tens of thousands of examples and dozens of organizations, like this is unbelievably compelling that directionally it drives an increase in giving. And again, anyone who uses a DAF will explain this exact same thing to you. I give much more when I use my DAF than when I donate with a credit card.
It's funny, you had mentioned this earlier in the conversation. I wrote it down because I wanted to come back to it. You said that something like, whereas I would have given $10 or $20 when I give through my DAF, I'm going to give $50. And I wrote that down and put a question mark by because I didn't fully understand it. So what is that? Do you have? There must be some sort of hypothesis as to what the logic is. Why are people giving more with their DAF than with their credit card?
Yeah, so there is true increased capacity is one piece of it, and then there's a psychology element. So the increased giving capacity for me, it's my employer is matching it. I have literally twice as much plus growth in the market as it's invested. So that is like a bigger pot of money for my DAF than otherwise if I gave through a credit card. For others that are being more strategic or have more assets to play around with, they're going to also benefit from tax benefits, where if you're contributing like appreciated stock, you're holding on to some NVIDIA shares you got 10 years ago, and you contribute a few of them to your DAF account, you're going to save like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital gains tax. That goes directly into your giving. Like you have increased your capacity, and then however your investments perform in the market, and those are growing tax-free. Like there's 3 layers of tax benefits. Has increased the available funds to give than if you were just giving, open outside of a DAF. So that's one piece of it. The second piece though is the psychology element we were talking about earlier. The best way for us to appreciate that is to think about what happens when you have a gift card to a store. So if I have a gift card and I go into a Nordstrom, I'm just like looking at the store across the street from me. What happens when you have a gift card when you go shopping? You go, how much is on this? And you look for things of that price value, and you have a higher capacity and interest in spending because you've got this fun money, right? It's like a freebie and you want to spend more of it. You want to find things that are more expensive. So when you have a DAF and it's irrevocable and it's this like pot of money, it is also kind of a fun money element. It's like, this is my giving money, and you don't have the same level of attachment to it. And you're way more like liberal with spending it because of that.
Super good. I want to flip that to a different side of this, which is the nonprofit organization strategy, which to obviously try to get their donors to increase the use of this. If this is obviously going to do this, it's going to bring in more money and all that other stuff. So I get the benefit for the organization. Do you talk to the orgs about pitching this, using this, selling this, marketing this for themselves to just, again, increase the philanthropy towards their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one piece that I'll flag to everybody, I know the hardest part is just like, where do you get started? It's like, it's a lot of information. It's overwhelming if it's new to you. And that's one of the main reasons that we started DAF Day. It's taking place on October 9th this year. Go to dafday.com. You'll find all the info you need. But the whole point is like, let's create an impetus. It's so much easier when it's shared. It's so much easier when it's already out there. You don't need to like spin up a DAF event just for yourself or your own organization. Just, hop on. Like it's there, it's available. You just do with it what you want. There's no cost. It's just like, it's an event and it's a day, it's a holiday. It's something that you can point at and use to help move into action some things you've been interested in doing in your own fundraising strategy. So I'll put that out there up front of like, the timing is right now. This is a great time to get engaged and try some things. I think there's the first step, and some of the easiest stuff is just like, how do we make it clearer and easier for existing donors with a DAF to use their DAF and make sure that they do that instead of giving to us with a credit card? That is like the clear and present enemy. It's like every DAF donor still uses a credit card, every single one. And there's a variety of reasons. Often they perceive using their DAF as like harder, or they want to do it for bigger gifts. There's no reason, especially if you have DAF Day or DAF Pay in your donation forms and on your website. Like, make sure they know about it, make that front and center, point people to it, like talk about DAFs, mention it in your marketing, like all that stuff. But to your point, There's also a lot of value, especially if you're going to start putting more language around DAFs in your overall marketing to provide some education, because you're going to be reaching some people who don't know what a DAF is. And I think that's a huge opportunity for nonprofits to lead the discussion. Now, look, most of you, I'm assuming, are not financial advisors. And so you're not making financial recommendations to your donors. And that's always a good thing to disclaim. I make the same disclaimer whenever I talk about this. My certifications have lapsed from my banking days for sure. But so you absolutely can educate people and tell them stories about other donors that use this tool and why, and encourage them to talk to their own advisors about it. And that is just a great approach where you're creating value for your donor. There's an ask buried in there that's like subtle and organic, which is like, because you have this staff, you'll be able to support great organizations like ours more often and, with more money, but it's not how you're leading. And I just think that's always so valuable to have value add you can give back to your supporters. And I think educating them about this tool is one of those examples. Also, if they learned about it from you and they're learning about it in the frame of this is a tool to get in more engaged with your philanthropy, like those are the more likely outcomes, that they're going to get more engaged with their philanthropy and that you will be top of mind when they use their DAF, which is exactly what you want.
Amazing.
So good.
Amazing.
It's so good. Just I know Remy has a question. Just that the synergy piece for me is so fascinating, that we were thinking about this 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it just wasn't there. And now it feels like it's there, and it's so much. Just to see the button on like pages, right? The DAF Pay button on the pages is like, how was that not there before?
Yeah, we hear that all the time. Like, this is so obvious why I wasn't here. I think it's the right time. We had the right team. It took some real technological innovation, and still improving every day. But it is really exciting, and we're at this inflection point where it's accessible to everybody to give it a try. There are so many providers to choose from. The experience has gotten better on all fronts. So jump on board. What are you waiting for?
What do you see as the future for this? Like, what we sort of know what happened in the last 2 or 3 or 20 years, but what happens in the next 2 or 3? I won't make you predict what happens in the next 20 years, but let's just go like 2, 3 years in terms of DAF giving.
It's funny. I was just at a conference last week speaking on a panel, and I basically asked the same question to some fundraisers and I said 5 years. Like, if we were doing the same session again in 5 years, what do you think we would be talking about? And what would the session be about? And the first person to respond was like, we wouldn't have the session. It would be the standard. We wouldn't have anything to discuss. Everyone will be giving with their DAF. And obviously you'd have a payment option to do so, just like it'd be like having a discussion about PayPal. Like, we wouldn't do it. It'd be so standard. And I agree with that. I think we'll still be talking about DAFs, and I don't think I'll be out of a job talking about them and educating people about them for a long time. But I do think it will be clear how DAFs can be the charitable wallet for everyone. And that is a future I really think we're charging towards, where anyone can use this. And the DAF instrument is completely removed it from the narrative of a tool of the super wealthy to be the tool of how everyone becomes a giver, how everyone becomes a philanthropist. And that's happening and accelerating. And I think 5 years, as opposed to being the exception, I think will be the standard.
Yeah. By the way, just in the course of this conversation, you've mentioned 2 different ways to market this that sound so much better than DAF. Just that idea of the giving wallet idea you mentioned before, so like a donation account. They just sound better than the donor advised fund, which is like me pointing and saying, you give over here. It just doesn't, like, it sounds old, right? So definitely marketing it and making it sound like something that the average person could use and would use in the same way, like you said, a credit card or whatever it is, or something else, their bank account. Like, it just makes it much more accessible, which the first thing you've already done, not just you, but others as well, you've broken the barrier around how people think about it, and changing that culture. That is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do. It's enormous. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of big players, like you mentioned, involved. And so breaking the market on it or changing the mindset around it is already perhaps, at least for the moment, the biggest thing that a company like yours has done, now it's only sort of almost feels like it's like this sort of the snowball effect of everything else is based on that.
I think the biggest unlock is nonprofits getting engaged in this, like not being passive recipients of this funding, but they're talking about it, they're promoting it, they're marketing it. That's what's been missing for, the past 10 to 20 years. And that's what I'm proudest of is our work with nonprofits to get them confident and have the knowledge, the tools, and just feeling empowered to take on DAFs and DAF fundraising on their own terms. Because again, how do you reach people that are givers? Through nonprofit organizations. So I think we are in partnership with all these organizations. They're the ones that are going to change this. It's not Fidelity and Schwab or even community foundations. I think it's really going to be nonprofits that drive this change to be a really, really powerful outcome for giving and for the sector.
Okay, we're almost out of time, even though we had an interruption there for that fake siren. We're going to switch over to like a little bit more of like a speed round kind of a thing, just a different nature of a question.
Sure.
I will for sure in the show notes, link to your website, link to your DAF day, which you pitched really well there during the course of this conversation. I appreciate that. So if anyone didn't think Mitch Stein could do marketing, he did it during the course of today's conversation. Ray, you want to shoot the first question here on the rapid fire?
Sure. Book or podcast you would recommend to people in the nonprofit space?
This podcast.
Yes, thank you. That's what
Is
I
that
was
the right
looking
answer?
for.
That is a very good answer, but we're so humble that we can't fully accept it so we require you to give a different one.
Okay. It's funny because I actually try to read and listen to stuff that's like this is what I do all day at work. So I tend to I read a lot of fiction and history things, also relevant to nonprofit work. But there's a podcast that I was on a few months ago called Mission to Movements that's hosted by Dana Snyder. And her big emphasis is on recurring giving, which is helpful for everyone. But also she's just like a really, really good marketer. And I think can help any nonprofit to think about their fundraising strategy through a marketing lens. So yeah, I would go after you finish listening to the entire library of Biddy and Remi's podcast, I would check out Mission to Movements.
Biddy, before you go rapid fire, I have a follow-up question. Can you do recurring giving through DAF
Through
Pay?
DAF Pay, yep.
Awesome.
It depends on the form, like who has set that up in the form or not. But yeah, we have the capability.
Okay. I love that. Thank you for sharing that one. I'm a big fan. We're both big fans of Dana Snyder and her work on monthly giving, recurring giving. She actually shared a stat in one of her events about corporate giving in terms of the amount of money that's out there that's not being used or not being given ultimately, which dovetailed what you said earlier in the course of this conversation. Okay. My question for you here is, what's the one buzzword from nonprofits that you would kill?
I mean, it's probably a little trite, but the word nonprofit
Yes.
is brutal.
Totally.
I don't have a good solution, but yeah, if I had a magic wand, there'd be a good alternative.
Totally. You know how much like bad like psychology and mindset and garbage is like wrapped in the heads of people who run great organizations because of that word?
Or just like the society and like right now, this onslaught that's happening against nonprofits in politics, like it makes it really easy when the name is nonprofit to be like, they're a nonprofit and look at XYZ spending or that person's salary. And it's just like, oh God, we've completely lost the thread. So yeah, that word doesn't do us any favors.
Well, that's a good one. I think most people would have skipped that one, but I appreciate that you went right for the jugular on the industry. The entire industry needs a new name. So, okay, good. Two more. Rami, go.
Best piece of advice you've received in your professional journey?
Boy, sorry, you have to give me a second. I'm like running through the index in my brain. Having started a startup that failed ostensibly, I think that was like a very formative experience. And I remember one of my investors told me, like kind of in the aftermath, that and me basically communicating, felt like I let all these people down. And he was like, you're only letting people down if you let this stop you. And that people like invested because they believed in you and it's not actually about this company. And that was a big like eye-opening moment for me as a person. And I think that relates to it doesn't need to be like financial investment, but I think that relates to failure and trying things and learning, and that the only failure is like stopping because of it.
Love it. Okay,
Awesome.
last question. You recently attempted to do a triathlon, correct?
That's
Ended up not being a triathlon. I read the post. I thought that was crazy that happened. Maybe if you don't know the background of it,
No.
they did do the swim, right? You skipped the swim. Yeah, bad
the
weather.
river was too contaminated. It wasn't,
Contamination. Oh,
yeah, it wasn't my fault.
right there. Okay. Has that deterred you or spurred you to do something next? And what is that thing?
Yeah, I definitely, well, now I did all this training for a half Ironman and all three elements of it, including a very expensive wetsuit that I didn't get to wear. So, yes, I haven't picked one yet, but I will be searching for another half Ironman where the swim takes place in a lake and not an urban river, because apparently that's a frequent occurrence for these events.
I've seen that Seinfeld episode, so I'm familiar with what happens when you try and swim in the river.
Okay. Mitch Stein, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great. Really appreciate it. And we will, as I mentioned in the show notes, link to the DAF Day and to the company itself. Any last parting words before we go?
No, I just encourage everybody. If you've made it this far, you've gotten a lot of information. And would just say, do what makes sense. Get started. Like, don't try to eat the whole elephant. And follow me on LinkedIn because I talk about DAFs all the time. If this is an interest area for you,
Thank you so much, Mitch. Appreciate it.
thank you.